Welcome to the Crime Redefined podcast, produced by Zero Cliff Media. Coming to you from the US Bank Tower, high above downtown Los Angeles. In our podcast, we drill deep into forensics and criminal investigation from the viewpoint of the defense, as well as explore the intersection of the media and the justice system.
Greetings, Crime Redefined listeners. We hope you enjoyed part one of our interview with Douglas Century about his new book, Split Decision, that he wrote with Ice-T and Spike. We now present the conclusion of that interview, followed by our thoughts on the episode. Please enjoy.
Yeah, let me build on that. The book draws a distinction between guys who are players, hustlers, or those who are straight up gangbangers in South Central. Could you talk a little bit about the difference in how ICE could coexist in that environment without joining a gang?
Yeah. So people always ask me this. You're from your neighborhood. That's why, like in New York, you might hear guys in the streets saying, who you with? Like Italians would say, like, what crew are you with? And in New York is much less based on what neighborhood you come from. But in LA, it's all like Spike is 30s. So that's really, the streets are called, the 30s. And they were called originally they were the Harlem 30s. And now they're more known as Roland 30s or Harlem Crips, whatever. ICE is more from the 60s, so he was affiliated with these gangs. And by the time, these guys were in high school, you're basically by default affiliated with the gang. But because there are guys who literally put the bandana on, they wear a certain uniform, you've all seen the Snoop videos and the Nipsey Hussle. I mean, when you wear that Seattle Mariners hat, you're saying I'm 60s. The Game has a song out now called Everybody Wants to Go to La La Land. And he's talking about every single hat in LA means a neighborhood. Kitchen Crip, Pyroos, if they wear Philadelphia, all these different neighborhoods are the neighborhood. But when the players and hustlers would dress differently, meaning they would have on gaiters, they would have alligator shoes, they'd have all this designer stuff, Fendi, and so the gangbangers would say, oh, they're not at war with us, meaning you could kind of have diplomatic immunity to go into another neighborhood and meet a girl or whatever. Because the way ICE explained it is gangbangers are just trying to kill the enemy, the other gangbangers. They're not really trying to kill like people who are civilians. That's why, these moms, like, Spike's grandmother would like call to these gangbangers and say, boys, come here. Do you know that, Jesus loves you? Be like, they still have that sense of respect for the neighborhood, a lot of them. But they kind of float above it. In the audiobook in this interview, I asked ICE, I said, well, you said you introduced all these brands to the neighborhood like Fendi and Gucci. And how did you know about them? He goes, we didn't. We just wanted to look like rich white people. And then Spike goes, yeah, at that time Bjorn Borg was the shit. So we had like Fila, we'd carry Fila tennis rackets to get in the
that's
stores.
right, yeah.
Yeah, and ICE goes, we didn't know nothing about no Fendi, but we just saw what rich white people dress like, and that was what. So if you're wearing that and you're going back to the neighborhood, also they would definitely take care. If they did a job and took like, I don't know, $300,000 worth of Rolexes, they would hook up the gangbangers in the neighborhood for sure. So these guys wanted them to be, they would spread the wealth for sure. But, as Spike found out, it all goes out the window when you go to prison. You are not a player, you're not a hustler, you're your neighborhood. And then Spike had to be, so he's 30. So he's a 30s Crip no matter where he goes. California's scariest thing about the book for me was just realizing how racially you're just in this car. You're in this this category. So you're from your neighborhood, and more than that, you're your race. And the Southern or Sureños, Mexicans run the prison system in the south of California, and the Norteños or Northerners in the north, and then the Crips and the Bloods and the Aryan nations. You can't hang out with people from a different race. So I said, God, man, he was getting these warnings from his buddies, don't come up in here, man, because motherfuckers don't know nothing about no Dom Perignon and lobster. They're putting rags on their heads and gangbanging. And remember that scene in Susanville, which is way up north. They call it lose your girl world, because no girls would come up all that way into Northern California into the mountains to visit you. And there's a race riot, and it's all about a Cinco de Mayo celebration where these two Crips decided to walk through, and Compton Crips, and they decided to strut through and flash their gang signs, and it just leads to just the bloodiest scene ever. And I was like, wow, like there's such a level of what they call prison politics. And Spike said, I don't care if you think you're a player, you cannot, there's no lone wolves if you get into the California prison system, meaning you can't do your time alone. You are your race. And I was like, wow. So all that player hustler stuff goes out the window, all the fancy stuff. When you are incarcerated, you become, once again, where you're from. And I mean, it's almost stamped on you, like generationally, you're from that neighborhood and you can't say, I'm not from there. In fact, I asked Spike a few times, what if somebody says, they don't say where you from, they say, what's that Palmer life? And you can say I'm not gangbanging, but if you come back with an incorrect answer, you get shot. Yeah. Like it's I don't know, the level of nuance to what you have to do to survive in South Central Los Angeles is wow.
Yeah, and I guess really another stroke of luck for Ice's later music career is that he wasn't gang affiliated, because as he pointed out, of course, you'd lose at least half your audience if you picked a certain side. So I know you're a bit of a student of hip hop. So my question is, what do you think the significance was in the evolution of rap music that Ice was able to essentially be the spokesman for the entire West Coast, in the early days of that movement of rap?
Yeah, well, he made that conscious decision. So when he came out, and people are used to now saying Snoop wearing blue and saying, Long Beach Crips, and right. Nipsey Hussle was 60s, and there's all kinds of Bloods. When Ice came out, he said, you couldn't do that. It was kill on sight. What changed was after the riots in '92, they did, and Ice was part of this. They had a record called "All in the Same Gang." A very powerful Crip named Michael Concepcion put it together, and they had a peace treaty, right? And that's when you started to see Suge Knight, a Blood working with Crips. But before that, Ice said it wasn't safe. So you'd actually see him. He'd say, I made a conscious decision in a lot of my videos. I'd wear blue in one scene and red in the other. I didn't want people to know. It wasn't a good career move, and it wasn't good for my health. It wasn't good for my safety to have people know, where I'm from. And he wasn't glorifying it. So what changed was Ice came out before all that. Ice came out in 87, 85, 86. He makes his first sort of gang related song, 6 in the Morning, early on. But even by 87, he's talking on the OG album, he talks about, in a song called Midnight, he's talking about all the neighborhoods, ETG, 8-Tray Gangsters. He was talking about it, but he wasn't glorifying it. And he was very careful. Like he had guys in the Rhyme Syndicate, like his friend Randy Mack. See, at one point I said, oh yeah, Randy Mack said to you, I wrote this, this is a good detail that shows you how much Ice read the book. And Randy Mack says, yo, man, stop doing those party rhymes and spit that real gangster shit. So he did 6 in the Morning. And he goes, yeah, well, listen, man, you got to take out that because Randy Mack is from Van Ness Gangster. So he's a Blood. So he never would have said cuz. And I was like, okay, shit, I'll take that word. But he said,
big mistake.
But he goes, thing of it is, we had the Rhyme Syndicate, we had Bloods, Crips, we had everybody. But I had a rule: no gang banging, no talking about gangs in the studio, no talking about gangs. It just wasn't smart. And now it's become fashionable, and it's weird. Like, I don't know when it became fashionable, because you got these guys like, the guy that turned snitch, 6ix9ine. Yeah. So all those guys, but even like Cardi B's a Blood, and I'm like, Ice talked about this on the. I encourage anybody, it's a 1-hour interview with me talking to Ice and Spike on the audiobook, and Ice says, I don't know, man, like they don't even understand gang enhancement charges. Explain that, Spike. And so Spike explains that if they can prove that you're a member of a gang, you can get 10 added years, at least in California, just by saying that. So it's really stupid to just be claiming a gang just for fashion reasons or something, A very, very powerful Crip said in one interview, a very well-known guy, he said, I don't know, man, it seems like you can just go buy a bandana now and just put it on. Like it's just become a fashion statement, right?
It's a uniform, yeah.
Yeah, it's a uniform, and Ice, one of the funniest things that happened to Ice was when he did the movie, he's not in the movie Colors, but he did the song Colors, and he went on tour, and he would see these white kids, in like, I don't know, middle of the Midwest, they made up the name of a gang, I think, they did, they had some fake gang names in the movie. But anyway, he would see these guys with like, they printed up t-shirts, rolling 60s Crips, and he would be like, what these guys know about that? It's just like cool to them. It's, these are guys that watch Beavis and Butthead, and they're and they're throwing on a gangster name. But he said something really cool. You know how like for years the mafia denied. This is people who see Michael Francesi and Sammy the Bull on YouTube. they don't remember that in the 70s, the mafia would say there is no mafia. I mean, Joe Colombo, there was they would not allow The Godfather to be made using that word mafia. They were like, okay, they used racketeering and all other words, but not mafia, because they denied it existed. And, obviously Joe Valachi had talked, but very few gangsters had actually talked at that point. So Ice, I think he said at one point, in one of their records, he goes, the syndicate, Rhyme Syndicate, it was a stand-in. It was sort of a stand-in for a crime crew. They weren't criminals. But he said, we say on the record, the syndicate does not exist. So it's like patterned on the mafia. Like the first rule is we don't exist. But I know that's all changed now. And I mean, I like new hip hop. I listen to it, but I feel I don't know. It's leading kids into a false sense of they don't have the Ice-T OG mentality of somebody telling them this is how it goes down, but here's the downside. It seems like it's all about gangbanging, right? And
I was gonna say, what a great comment Ice had in the book about, he didn't realize that you could fake rap, that it never crossed his mind. He's making these videos. It's like, no, we've got our own cars, we've got our own guns, we've got our own girls, we're going to use them. Why would we fake it? And it's before the studio gangster thing that's going on now.
It didn't exist. Well, that comes up because Spike is carrying an Uzi in one of the videos, and the police are looking for him. But so I thought it was like Ice goes, I didn't know you could lie. Like that's why it's my girl on the cover of my first album. It's Darlene. That's my Porsche. That's my jewelry. Those are my guns. And I asked his manager George. I said, so that was like, wow, you were just being authentic. And he goes, Doug, no, let's just break it down. Why would we spend money on models? Why would we rent guns? Like, why would we spend? He actually broke it down from a financial. He was like, why would we rent models and stuff? Like all the guys had good-looking girlfriends. If we wanted,
I love that. You're being authentic, and you say, why do we need to go hire people? They're right here.
Well, Ice didn't say it like that. I said it like I didn't think you could lie. Like I didn't. But his manager explained it very clearly. Like, Doug, you're shooting a movie. You're shooting a video. There's everything's budget. What am I going to rent a gun? Like we got guns. Right. What am I going to rent a house with a swimming pool? We had those. So it was also that they were just balling like that. And that's why the funny part, when Ice starts rapping and he meets Grandmaster Caz and all these like well-known New York rappers, they're like, dude, why do you want to be a rapper? Like nobody's making money. Nobody's bought a car yet. And you got all this shit. And he goes, yeah, but I'm trying to make an exit from this life because I see there's an expiration date on being a street criminal. Like you're not doing this at age 35, 39, and you haven't done some prison time.
Yeah, you kind of made my next point a little bit here. It's like, Ice could always see the big picture. And then even though rap was not particularly lucrative in the 80s, he stuck with it and eventually left the life of crime. What were some of the factors and life events that got Ice out of crime permanently?
Well, one was this horrible car accident he was in where he basically nearly died. And I didn't put as much as I did in the first book. If people want to really read about it, in the first book, he used to party at this place called Carolina West. Party meaning hanging out with girls because he didn't drink. But, you're coming home at 6 a.m. It's very easy to fall asleep at the wheel, and he did. And he drifted into traffic. He got T-boned in his Porsche, and he was basically, if he hadn't been so fit, because he was a gymnast and a dancer, and then he had the military training, so he's always been a really fit guy, strong. And the doctors told him if he hadn't been so fit, he would have died. But I think he was in a coma. Then he was in the hospital for months, and for the first few weeks, he was in the county hospital as a John Doe. And he said that was one revelation, was he realized all these guys you're hanging out with, they're players, you're in the club, but they don't really give a fuck about you. Like you go missing for 2-3 weeks, they're not looking for you. And that was the problem. He had no family to be looking for him. So one of his friends, that same guy, Randy Mack, his mom somehow found out Ice was in the hospital and found out, told him, look, he's a vet. So then he got moved to the Veterans Hospital, which was better care. But he said, Doug, I was on crutches. Like I was on a cane. And I couldn't be doing these parkour getaways. So part of it was I couldn't do it anymore. But then he went down and he won this talent contest. And Curtis Blow said, so he said, I was literally like limping in there with a cane. And I thought, okay, I could do this. And he went broke for quite a while. I think he knew, okay, I cannot keep doing this. I will die in prison or I will just die. And then the other turning point was I think he was still on his cane and he sees Run DMC selling out the stadium in LA, and he goes, wow, lasers. He goes, this shit is rock and roll. Like the old school rappers, no, they hadn't made any money. So, they hadn't really made money. That's why everybody's, Melly Mel, all those guys from that original generation, their record deals probably weren't good, but also they just weren't, it wasn't a huge industry the way it became. But once he saw Run DMC, that second wave, which was like Run DMC, LL Cool J, I think he thought, wow, there's real money in this. Like Run DMC looked like rock stars. So that inspired him to think that's attainable. This is going to be big. And, the other thing he always says is one by one, all my friends were going to prison, like literally one by one. And they would all call him and say, his friend. So Shawnee Sean, again, this is in the first book, not in the second one, but Shawnee Sean, his best friends, he got busted for weed. And in that house, there was a whole bunch of stolen stuff that belonged to ICE. Like they used to just use it as a storage place. And he could have given up ICE and said, I don't know whose stolen shit that is. But he said, no, that's mine too. So he took the weight. He did 3 or 4 years. And, I said to me, look, if Sean hadn't taken the weight for that stolen shit that was with his weed, there would be no Ice-T because I'd have gone to prison and I would never have got a record deal. So a whole bunch of and then that's why he says he's so blessed he won't even spit on the sidewalk because he goes, it was hundreds and hundreds of felonies and I got a pass. I never got caught. Sometimes because his friends would take the weight, which is the old school. One of actually the niece of the Russian mobster that I wrote about in my other book, she read this book and said, wow, you don't find loyalty like that anymore. Like the loyalty, the main characteristic that I would take away from this book, having written it, but also if I'd read it cold and I wasn't the guy that wrote it, I would say, wow, man, I stayed loyal to Spike and Spike stayed loyal to Ice. Like after years and years, it's a rare thing to find anymore. And that's what Ice says at some point. That's the loyalty is the characteristic in another human that I value more than anything else.
Yeah. So, coming back to, I guess, the main theme of the book, which if you distill it down is probably we're all only one bad decision away from messing up our life. So, how and why do you think this book may get through to the kids who are at highest risk?
Well, I was thinking about that and I was being honest. I was thinking, I remember being 16, 17, 18. I don't think I listened to too many things that older people told me to do. I mean, like going to Princeton. I remember somebody saying, if I was going to be a writer, you know what I would do? I would learn as many languages. And now I'm really trying to learn Spanish, but I was like, oh, fuck you. Why do I have to learn other languages? Like some guy telling me, learn many languages. It really is, it's a good piece of advice, but I don't want to hear it. Right. So I don't know that these young guys are going to listen to, oh man, Ice-T, man, you old as fuck, man. Or, who's like old? Like every neighborhood. If you've been around these gangsters and you guys write, you guys do this podcast about crime. Every neighborhood's filled with old time gangsters. And you know what? I'll meet these guys. I've seen him in Brooklyn. A guy with like his teeth are out. He's in a wheelchair, and people say, man, he was balling back in the day. Like he had like Mercedes. But you look at this guy and he looks broke. And you're just sitting there going, he's sitting there puffing on Newports, and you're saying, really, he was a gangster? Like it almost doesn't seem true. So I think to the young kids, it might be tough unless we can get Spike and Ice, or even just Spike, into these like little seminars or little speaking engagements, and just really, because then he can talk the talk. But when I said this on The View, of all places, I'm seeing these two guys on The View, because when it came to the promotions, I've done some of it, but everybody wants to just see Ice and Spike talk about their friendship. So they're on, and like Colbert, it was just Ice. But on The View, Ice says something like, he just, like I said, he speaks like a philosopher. He goes, you know what? Moving forward is just so slow and incremental. Like it took me years and years to build to this point where I'm at now. Going backwards is instantaneous. And he goes, I could pick up this coffee cup and just throw it into the audience and I'm canceled. My career's over. Like it's so easy to go backwards. And I don't know if, the thing that I hope people will get from this book, Ice says, think about every decision. And Spike says that to every decision you make. But then I think in one of his interviews, or maybe he just told me this, I'm a blur of Ice material right now. He said something like, Doug, I'm not talking about like, should I go to the grocery store? That's pretty over the plate. But there's a voice in your head. You've had 3 beers, you're at this party, you're something in your brain saying, probably take an Uber. But you overrule yourself saying, I've gotten away with it before. Or, you're married, some girl's at a party, she wants to sleep with you, and you're like, I don't want to fuck up my marriage. I mean, Bill Clinton probably had that voice when he saw Monica Lewinsky saying, don't fuck up your presidency over a blowjob, bro. Like, but it's those kind of it's those decisions where you already have a voice in your head saying, not a good.
The little man never lies. The little man in your head never lies.
Exactly. So if I don't, I think the way to get through kids would be, I think if this became a film where you have younger actors, and there's talk of that, but it's just the arrogance of youth. I have a mafia friend in New York, like from a mafia family, and I don't know. He throws parties now. He's like a promoter, and he said something because he's got all these young kids, and I said, "How do you deal with this?" He goes, "Doug, I don't argue with youth." Like it's kind of like it's pointless. You're trying to convince a kid. If I try to tell a kid, no, Muhammad Ali would have beat Tyson. No, what are you talking? I was like, dude, okay, you don't understand how great Ali. You didn't see him live. I saw him. Whatever. There's no point arguing with that. So I don't know that you can get through to these kids. I'm a little skeptical of whether you can get through to the 17 or 18-year-old who's already on that path. But if we could get the kids that are close to that, maybe the kids that are still somewhat good and they're maybe being drawn to negative influences, they might, if the goal always was to get Ice and Spike on a kind of lecture circuit, and ultimately maybe just Spike just talking, because I think the way he talked to those kids in prison, he did make connections. The warden got letters from these kids saying, man, that guy really helped me understand things.
Yeah, the messenger is key.
The messenger, exactly. And it's just like Ice-T at one point, he regrets it, but he got into this problem with Soulja Boy, right? I don't know, forget what it started over.
That was pretty funny. You said, yeah, your rhymes are garbage, homie.
Yeah, and then I know Soulja Boy's on YouTube, and he didn't even know who Ice-T was, and he's like, "Man, you older than my granddaddy's nuts." Yeah, there's a YouTube video, and I was like, "Yeah, that's the problem. You start telling people and saying, Ice-T was a gangster. Ice-T was, or like he grew up with this life." Oh man, you talking about that guy on the Geico commercials? Come on, man. Like, they don't see it. So,
at the point that Ice-T is what you might call triple OG, I mean, I'm feeling old.
Yeah, I know, right? And the funny thing is I saw him on Jimmy Fallon. Like, again, he breaks this down so well. Why was, my brother is a musicologist and a professor, and he asked me, his students were fascinated by the Super Bowl. And he goes, my brother kind of wasn't into hip hop, but he understands how good Kendrick Lamar is and stuff like that. And he said, Doug, everybody on that Super Bowl show was like 50 and over. And I said, Kendrick Lamar is younger. He goes, he's 35. Like, there were no 17-year-olds. And I said, well, that's because that was not a hip hop show. It was a Dr. Dre aftermath. Like, those were his artists, 50 Cent and Eminem. And I said, got to understand too, for a lot of kids they're not kids, they're 35, 36. That's the golden age for them. They were in sixth grade. They were in fifth grade. They heard Bone Thugs. I have friends who tell me, oh, Bone Thugs first of the month. I was like, really? Like, that was the song that changed it for you? But that's what they grew up with. So Ice was on Jimmy Fallon, and he was like, Ice was on Cheerios boxes this year, Tide commercials, like, and this is the guy that was being boycotted, in 1991, 1992. He tells Jimmy Fallon, you know what's changed? The CEOs of all these companies making these decisions, these Fortune 500 companies, are 35, 40 years old. They're not afraid of us. They grew up with us. They want Snoop Dogg in their promotions. They want Ice-T in their promotions. We don't scare them anymore. So there's been a changing of the guard. The older 70-year-old people who used to think Ice-T was a threat to America or whatever, they're not making those decisions anymore. So, and that's a good thing, because Ice-T was never a threat to America. He's just an artist. And Spike actually, one of the amazing things about this book, Spike really seems at some points like a scary dude. But anybody who meets him now just says, oh my God, he's like this teddy bear. He works at the hospital. He's just like the sweetest seeming guy. And if you met a guy like that, and I've met a few of these guys in real life, it's so hard to process that he was once violent, or that he was once, in prison for so many years and a convicted murderer. He was talking to my daughter actually on a text message. And he's all these guys are such charmers. Like, you got to be a player, you're a charmer, right? Like, you can just spit game. So she goes, oh, Spike is telling me your dad is the Dr. Dre of writing. And I said, I don't know about that. But I was like, yeah, Spike's like this teddy bear. And then I look at my daughter and I said, he's a convicted first-degree murderer. She goes, yeah, but he didn't pull I said, I'm just talking about how you can reform your life and you can seem like a changed man, right? So, you see these guys like that. You might see a guy who's like a big teddy bear of a guy, just seems sweet, always smiling. And you don't stop and think, wow, that guy might have done something that I can't even imagine. Like,
that's got to be a little bit surreal, though. You have your daughter defending a killer.
That is surreal.
You think that conversation would go the other way around?
Yeah, and also, well, no, but it's like he doesn't. If you tell people, because if people read the book, he didn't go and pull the trigger. He didn't want anybody killed. He made the bad decision of the kind of people that he sent into the store. But Ice and Spike were very clear to me that They didn't want violence on their jobs. Violence was just, it just wasn't helpful. They wanted the money, they wanted the jewelry. And the way ICE explains it, because you think, well, there are no victimless crimes. But ICE goes, you take down $300,000 of Rolexes, it's insured. You even break it, you break the store's glass, that's all insured. But once you start harming people, you start hurting people and killing people, it's a different level. And so when ICE said, the game escalated from, the slick, what they called, trimming, they would just pick the lock with a nail file, to bashing with a sledgehammer, and then pistol bashing. He goes, pistol bashing is not slick. It's just it's a takeover. It's an armed robbery. He said the young gangbangers didn't know how to do what we did, so they would just. He goes, I was never with that, because I always figured there could be a good Samaritan in the line of sight who could take you out. There could be a cop off duty, because I was never with that, because we could do it. They used the element of surprise. Yeah.
Do you sense any trauma from ICE in his crime days today? Like, if you're talking to him, do you sense any, I don't know, I guess trauma is, PTSD, that kind of a thing. I mean, those are some heavy stuff, heavy gigs that they were doing back then.
ICE doesn't show that. I sense it in Spike, some things, because like sometimes Spike and I would just talk I couldn't get him to finish the story in less than 3 hours. Like, my battery would run out on my recorder. And I said to ICE, I said, I got to get Spike to tell the story quicker. And he goes, Doug, he's been in prison so long, you ain't got shit else to do but talk. Like, it just sort of changes you. Sitting around in prison, just talking to other guys all the time. It makes it, and I mean, I've known guys too, payphones don't really exist anymore, but I knew guys that came out of prison, and they would get so agitated if they were waiting for the payphone. And I'd be like, dude, chill. And these are criminals in New York, and they would be like looking like they were ready to hurt somebody. But that's because in prison, waiting for the payphone is like your lifeline, right?
It's precious. Yeah,
it is precious. Yeah. But the thing about ICE is, he told me one story. I think he wouldn't mind me telling this. He said, Doug, it doesn't exactly go away, that street mentality. It's still there. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, I was leaving a club with Coco, and I think this was while we were writing the book, or maybe just before. So recently, he's leaving some event, and some guys just talking shit. There's paparazzi, and some guys saying, oh, Ice-T, you sell out, man, used to be about cop killer, now you're playing a cop. And they started saying something really disrespectful about Coco or something. And he said, man, I was ready to snap. I just wanted to go punch this guy in the face. And Coco said, why are you going to let him sue you for $10 million? And she got through to him, and he got in the car. But he said that mentality of, disrespect, he said, it doesn't go away. You just have to learn to control it. Right. And that's the thing that I really admire about Spike, is that he's living in a little studio apartment. He's just going to work, and it's not a glamorous job. And it's, that takes a lot when you have had Mercedes Benzes and flashy jewelry and all sorts of stuff illegally. It must take a lot out of you to say, let me humble myself. And as Ice says it, but Spike says it also very clearly, what if I'd been doing this from the beginning? What if I'd just been working an honest job? I'd have peace of mind. Like, when Ice told that story to me about, if he'd been in the game still, he'd be worried about somebody like breaking into the house and tying up his wife and daughter. He goes, but I've got peace of mind. That's priceless. It's beyond. Criminals do not have peace of mind. You're always looking over your shoulder. So, I mean, it's heavy. I don't know if there's a PTSD factor but yeah, both of them have told me that it's very hardwired, that sense that you still might snap, but you just have to learn to control it. Like most of us have to control our anger, right? We have to. You can't take out your frustrations on your kids. You can't, if a cop pulls you over and you really didn't do anything wrong, you can't bawl them out. You have to be, yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. We have to learn that. And, Ice is a great role model for America, because he's a guy that can actually say, I did this. It was wrong. I got away with it. Now here I am to tell you it's wrong. That pull quote on the back of the book is, I was racing. I'm so slick. I'm Ice. He actually said, I'm crazy Trey. I'm better than you. I'm going to make it. And then he sees there's a cliff, and he goes, now I'm against the traffic, coming back and saying, there's nothing up there but a cliff. But a lot of people don't want to hear it. And I was like, that's his metaphor for that game, which is like, there's no ending. You're racing to this demise,
Yeah. So, okay, let's lighten it up just a bit here, Doug. Do you have any like fun or interesting stories about experiences you've had with Ice-T while working on either of the two books?
Oh, I got a bunch of them. First of all, well, one of the funniest was he was recording the audio. We were recording the audiobook. And when we did the interview, I'm on there with all three of them, but it was all Zoom like we're doing now. And I was muted, of course, and I'm just listening to him record the audiobook. And Spike, I think it was allotted 3 days for his parts, but Ice was doing, he's, I'm going to bang this out in 1 day. Just because, like I said, his schedule is so busy. You know, he's got a rock band, he's got commercials, he's got a full-time job on it too. So anyway, he's in there and I'm listening, and there's a producer, and it's all the, you know, when you do an audiobook, you cannot, you know, even have a heavy S. Everything is like, let's redo that, punch it in. You know, it's like recording an album. And Ice finishes one chapter, and he just says, I don't know, he'd been going for 3 hours. He goes, yeah, yo, could a motherfucker get something to eat up in this dump? And he goes, I've been here for like 3 hours and you ain't paid me. I mean, you ain't fed me. And the producer goes, oh yeah, Ice, we got food trucks. And I'm thinking, yeah, he could have anything he wants. He could have a steak sandwich. He could have like, you know, whatever. And he goes, nah, man, you got a chili cheese dog? You got any like hot dogs? And they said, yeah, we could get. He goes, yeah, give me 2 chili cheese dogs and fruit punch Snapple, or maybe no grape Snapple if they don't have fruit punch. I was like, man, that's the most. And then I logged out because I figured, okay, they're gonna have lunch. I come back on, and then he's recording again, and the producer starts going, Ice, we got to do that again. Your stomach is like making those noises. And he goes, shut the fuck up, stomach. And I'm like, dude, you just scarfed down like 2 chili cheese dogs. I mean, but I said that to his manager. He goes, you know what? We've done corporate events where they're like, what does Ice want on the yacht? Caviar. And it goes, you know what Ice wants? He wants hot dogs and Kool-Aid. Like he's just the same dude he was when he was younger. He's just a real down to earth guy. He's funny. You know, one of the things, I mean, this is a funny one too. I would call him up and I would say, Ice, because a lot of times I would talk to Ice separately than Spike, just because of our schedule. Sometimes we did Zoom, but I called him up and I said, you know, there's a tone I can't really use in the book, Ice. And he goes, what do you mean? Well, Spike will be telling me about like planning this robbery. And he's like, it's almost like he's glorifying it again. He's talking about how clever he was. And then I said, but the reader's going to go, well, if you're so clever, why'd you go to fucking jail? You know what I mean? Like, and he goes, Doug, it's not that. Well, he's treating you like you're one of us. I said, what do you mean? He's talking to you like you're a player. Like, that's how we do it. I know it sounds twisted, but former criminals always sit around talking about their crimes, and it's like we're reliving them. And he's treating you like that too. Like, I know it's negative, but that's how we talk about it. Yeah, remember when we did this and this and this? And I said, well, I can't use it because the average reader's not going to relate to that. But I kind of felt like, wow, they've welcomed me into the circle of like, you know, this is how we talk amongst ourselves, man. Like we're planning this crime. And Ice told me actually at some point, he goes, Doug, you know, because they still think like this. He goes, Doug, you know, like I said, we raise the risk, you raise the risk, you raise the profit. That's one of his sayings. He goes, like, look, now I'm in my 60s, Doug. You think I couldn't put a crew together? If I didn't have my career on Law and Order, I could put together a crew of 5 guys, let's say. We're going to do a big job. Well, you know what? We've got families. In order to make that work, each guy would want $1 million to $2 million. So that means we got to look for a score that's $10 million. Doug, we could do it, but there are a good chance that someone's going to get shot. I mean, there's so much risk involved in that kind of like a bank job or something, right? Somebody's getting shot or killed. It's just a lot easier to stay at our regular jobs, okay?
Right.
You know, Doug, I was thinking, since you're kind of in with the guys, I think you should probably shave the word syndicate into the back of your head.
I don't, man. The funniest thing that happened during this whole book, and I don't think my daughter will mind this one, was it was lockdown. You know, nobody was traveling, nobody was doing anything, and I had some people over, and I had a fire pit, and we were making s'mores. I'd actually never made s'mores, but my daughter and her friend, who was a young lady, wanted to make s'mores. My daughter was a teenager, and then the phone rings, and it's like Ice-T. So I'm like, hey, yo, Ice. Oh, what's good, man? And my daughter says, oh, you sounded like Phil Dunphy. Like you were like, yo, what's crack-a-lack? And I was like, well, I didn't say what's crack. He said, and then they go, you said, we're having a marshmallow roast. And you tried to make marshmallow roast sound so gangster. Like we making some s'more. I said, I didn't say all that.
Called out by your daughter.
I said, we all code shift. Like I just talked like I'm, he goes, yeah, but you tried to make marshmallow roast. You were like, yo, I'm having a marshmallow roast. And I was like, oh God. So that became the running joke with my daughter and her friends. Like my dad's working with Ice-T. He's like, man, he's the only guy that tried to make marshmallow roast sound like it was like gangsta. So
that's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of laughs. We did, in spite of it being a kind of dark story in a lot of ways. There's humor in it, and Ice as a human being is the most I don't know. He's just got this way about him. He's likable, right? Like
Oh, absolutely.
everybody wants him on their commercials because his manager told me something like when companies do, marketing and they figure out who would be a good spokesman, there's name recognition is one factor, but then there's kind of negativity. So Snoop might have a higher, I'm just using Snoop as an example. Snoop might have a higher name recognition, but he might also have more negativity because maybe people don't like weed. Ice comes in at a really high name recognition and very few people dislike him. So he's really good for companies because he's just, I don't know, he's got that charm.
Real believable. He's really believable.
He seems like the realest dude, and he is. Like he's really the guy that would just order hot dogs when he could order like a filet mignon. He's just that guy. Like, let's keep it simple.
Let's do the PR. Let's do the PR box. Check that box. Give us a little tease on the last boss of Brighton.
Oh, sure. Gannon, we've gone long. I'm sorry about this. Cut out anything that I'm meandering on.
No, this is awesome. We appreciate it.
Yeah, we love it.
The Last Boss of Brighton is the only inside story ever told. It's told by me about, they say Russian mob, but these are Soviet Jewish emigre crime wave that hit New York like a thunderclap, lightning, thunder, whatever, in the 80s. These guys, about 500 hardened criminals came out with the exodus of Soviet Jewry, and these guys were some of the badass. So this is a guy named Boris Nayfeld, survived a gulag, did 3 stints in American prisons for money laundering, heroin trafficking, everything under the sun, worked with the Italian mafia. They are the guys, if you've seen Michael Franzese talking about the gasoline tax scam, the Russians and the Italians partnered in it. The Russians blew it up into the billion a year was the estimate in stolen tax revenue. So yeah, he went from an orphaned kid in Belarus in the USSR, born 2 years after the end of the Great Patriotic War, the 20 million people died in the Second World War. He's kind of orphaned. And he goes from that to being a Bentley driving multimillionaire with a villa in Antwerp and house in Staten Island. And now he's 74. And he tells me all his tales. And I wrote it in the style of the Valachi papers or Wise Guy, meaning, I interject occasionally to kind of call bullshit if I think he's not telling the truth. But I let him talk a lot because I had access to a guy who really was Russian mobsters don't talk. They don't tell their stories. But he's an elderly guy, so he wanted to kind of get the record straight. And I used a translator, so it's very, very faithful to how these guys talk. And it came to me as a TV series in development, meaning they wanted source material as a company in LA. And I was like, yeah, but I've got to write an honest book. So as long as he didn't have approval, and he didn't, and I can tell the real story, I think it's a really faithful, it'll take you inside the underworld in Brooklyn in the 80s and 90s. And it's kind of a throwback the way I envisioned it to Once Upon a Time in America. The Jewish gangsters, that was based on Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, Louis Lepke. These were striving, really not just the accountants of the mob. They were also violent and murderers. But this was the same thing, just in the 80s and 90s in Brooklyn, because they were fresh off the boat. They had been to prisons in the Soviet Union. But unlike any other crime wave before or since, a lot of them had university educations. So it was a really crazy moment, and we'll never see it again. Like, there were top bosses in Brooklyn who had university degrees in economics, and yet were also killers. So, and they've all kind of gone the way of, they don't exist anymore. The ones who made enough money are back in Russia as oligarchs. So if you go to Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, you will not find this anymore. So it's a period piece of the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, and it's really an insight into the mind of one particular very notorious Russian gangster who is now my friend.
That sounds great. Yeah, it really sounds great.
That's very cool. And, Doug, we're definitely going to be reading more of your books, and we hope that we can have you on another time. And, man, thank you for spending so much time with us today, Doug. It was really, really enlightening.
Well, once I get on a subject, I get immersed. So you got into my Doug talks too much kind of face, but you can use as much as you want.
We'll take it. And you know what, man, this is a important and impressive book. And, we really wanted to do our part in shining a spotlight on it. So awesome interview. Many thanks. And, good luck in all your ventures, Doug.
Thanks. I appreciate it, guys.
Thanks for
having me on. Okay.
Well, Dion, I know you've got a lot to say about Douglas's interviews, so let's have it.
Yeah, to say my head was exploding listening to this stuff, and especially after reading the book and then hearing from Douglas, I didn't even know where to start.
Yeah, it's a bit of an adrenaline rush, actually.
It was, and I have to say, it was kind of a weird walking down memory lane for me, because Spike and and ICE were behind so many things that I absolutely remember. Before I get into the main one, the first one is I remember the whole Harlem Globetrotters thing. I remember that they arrested these guys in Santa
no
Barbara.
kidding, really?
Yeah, and it was a big deal. It was kind of one of the first high profile, what would you call that, Mehul? Like a misidentifying
Racial profiling.
Racial profiling case. And I was like, I mean, because I remember kind of laughing about it, how kind of what is in the book and what Douglas said, how in the heck can you take someone who's, maybe 6 foot at best with a couple of guys that are going 6'8" to 6'10". It was so bad. It looked so bad for the city of Santa Barbara. And I was just like, you got to be kidding.
I don't know. And I never thought
involved with that was crazy.
Yeah, I never thought of the Harlem Globetrotters as like hardcore guys either.
Yeah,
just didn't
exactly.
come off that way. Like maybe some of today's professional athletes.
Full transparency. I've gone to a couple, and they're obvious. It's great family fun. So
right.
It's like, you got to be kidding me. How can you make this mistake? And then the second one that really hit home is I'd lived out of the country for a number of years, and I flew into LA and I drove down to see my brothers who were living in San Diego at the time. And I remember this case, this robbery it was high profile. It was, it was a really well-known family in San Diego. The robbery was like prospect is the Rodeo Drive of La Jolla.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this was something that was really big. It was all over the news. And unfortunately, it was kind of, again, a kickoff case of future high profile cases that came to San Diego after that.
Yeah, and I think at the time nobody knew who Spike was. He kind of faced it alone. Obviously, Ice-T had a lot of distance at that time, but it's interesting to look back and say, "Wow, that was Spike behind that." Something that you knew well from being in the area. I've got an interesting takeaway, I think, from this, and that's the importance of reading. It seems to me that what initially gave Ice-T the edge was the fact that he read Iceberg Slim, that he knew all those stories, that he could kind of sort of imitate, Iceberg and, the origins of rap. That seemed to give him a leg up, that he had that bank of knowledge. And it's just kind of ironic. So, I mean, no matter what field you're in, kids, reading is fundamental.
Yeah, I think that in addition to his military stint, I think 4 years in the Army, I think really helped him out. Definitely helped him out with planning this crime. Right. But I also think it gave him something, maybe a bigger sense of self than himself, being part of something larger.
Yeah, absolutely. Doug was talking about how, gosh, it might be hard to reach some of today's kids with an Ice-T because, they're like, oh, he's in his 60s. He's the guy in the Cheerios box, blah, blah, blah. But let's not forget about Body Count. And that's his, punk metal band. These guys are hardcore. Ice-T's still out there on the weekends doing it, playing these shows, playing big festivals. And this is awesome music, and it's relevant music. I mean, those last two albums, Carnivore and Bloodlust, I mean, they are talking about, unfortunately, what Ice-T was talking about 30 years ago, police brutality and all that kind of stuff that we still haven't learned. So to say that Ice-T is not relevant, you just better look a little bit closer. Another thought I had, Dion, is that, man, Spike's scary prison stay. I mean, that was one of the more detailed descriptions I had read really about prison, going from level 4 to level 1. Another thought I had, Dion, is I wonder if DJ Vodka, our past guest, I wonder if he ever guarded Spike at one of those prisons. It seems like the timeline would have overlapped.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a possibility. It'd be interesting to follow up with him and see if that's the case. I don't think I've ever read something where I was, could visually picture and be like, scared or almost
you could smell it. I mean,
reading those scenes, the way that he described it was so authentic. And that's why I think this book, even if it's only that section of where he describes being on the inside, is a must read for high school boys, because if you don't get straightened up by reading what you're going to go through and what to expect if you get locked up, then you deserve everything that you get, in my opinion.
Yeah. Now, Spike, to his credit, he owned his crimes. And I think as he started seeing the collateral damage, which is the deaths of family members, the fact he wasn't able to see his mother, who, was getting Alzheimer's, that really hit him. And I think that's what ultimately turned him around. I mean, he took responsibility for his crimes. Let me go back to one of my favorite topics, which is wrongful convictions. So now let's imagine that you're in for something that serious like that, but you're wrongfully convicted. You didn't do it. So it's not just a question of your lost time or maybe lost relationships, but what about, for these poor people who've been in 30, 40 years wrongfully convicted, what about all the people who've died? What about all the relationships they've lost? They don't get to see people when they're ill before they die. So there's a lot more loss than just losing your freedom.
Yeah. Could you imagine going through everything that he describes in the book and you absolutely are 100% innocent of that crime?
I don't know that I had the strength to continue to fight. I would just be so
mean, seriously.
disillusioned. I think I'd roll over. I mean, it's incredible that the people that, we've talked to who've been wrongfully convicted and they're not bitter,
It's
they
crazy.
fought hard, but I mean, hey, listen, it's your life, so.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't know. They're obviously really strong. Before we jump off, I want to mention one other quick story that was in the book. That another one that kind of brought me home is that when Ice was in the car accident, they took him to LA County.
Oh yeah.
And this brought back some memories. A number of years ago, a long time ago, I was doing a stunt that went a little sideways, and I don't know if it's a union or a what do they call it, like a state law where they got to take you to get checked out, and they take you to the closest hospital because we're shooting downtown. It was LA County. So I remember going in there. I'm actually in costume, and just absolutely the carnage that was in the emergency room. There was tables all over the place. There was people screaming, and they bring a doctor over. It was a female lady, and she was looking at me really sideways, like, why aren't you bleeding out? What's wrong with you? And I felt a little bit sheepish and shy to say, well, I think I hurt my tailbone, but I just
you hadn't been shot in the head.
No. And she actually seemed a little relieved, because you can imagine what she deals with on a day to day.
Oh yeah.
But at the same time, I'm never going to forget what that scene was like.
Well, I'm pretty sure that Doug is going to listen to this episode, but if Ice-T and Spike listen, I hope we did it upright.
I hope so too. I hope they enjoy the interview. So we actually hope you enjoy the interview. And it sounds like in addition to reading the book, the audiobook is a must-have as well.
Yeah, that sounds really good.
So thanks again to Douglas Century and for his energy and informative interview.
Well, pick up Split Decision and you will not be disappointed. There are life lessons for everyone in this book. There's no doubt that Ice-T he's a wise man. He has seen a lot in his time. He's lived quite the life. So for more information on Douglas Century, check out douglascentury.com. Doug's also got a very cool Instagram account. You can find him on Twitter. Check out Ice-T on Instagram under the appropriate title Ice MFT, and check out Spike on IG at Certified Spike. Well, Crime Redefined listeners, we hope you enjoyed this two-parter. And thanks as always for all your support. Dion and I have a lot of fun doing this podcast, and we learn a lot. So we hope that you'll continue to check us out.
Keep the comments coming.
Thank you for listening to the Crime Redefined podcast. Like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Crime Redefined. Please send us your comments and questions and join us for the next episode.